Welcome back, everyone. We're really diving deep into Chapter 2 of the Story of Western Science today.
Uh-huh.
So get ready to explore how the early Greeks tackled this big question,
Yeah.
the origins and workings of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
without the fancy tools of modern science.
Right, right. It's a fascinating journey, and it all starts with understanding, their worldview.
Sure.
They use the word fusus
Fusus.
for everything, from the stars in the sky to human behavior and politics.
Wow.
It was all interconnected. So
Yeah.
imagine trying to explain everything with a single unifying concept.
Okay, let's unpack this fusus.
Okay.
If everything is connected, how did they even begin to make sense of it all?
Okay.
Did they just attribute everything to the gods?
Actually, they went beyond simple divine explanations.
Really?
In Chapter 1, we saw how Hippocratic medicine emerged with its emphasis on naturalistic explanations for illness.
Right, right.
They observed, looked for patterns, and tried to understand the body's mechanisms.
Yeah, and they were limited by what they could see.
Sure.
So they used analogies to fill in the gaps. But how did they apply that same approach to something as vast as the entire universe?
Well, they took those analogies and reasoning to a cosmic level.
Wow.
And they came up with some pretty remarkable theories considering the limited tools they had.
I bet.
The first group to tackle this challenge were the Monists.
The Monists. Okay. Break that down for me.
The Monists believed that everything in the universe originated from a single element.
Wow.
Think of it like a universal building block.
Okay.
Thales, for example, proposed that everything came from water.
Water.
Imagine the audacity.
I know. Trying to explain the complexity of the universe with just water, it does make you wonder why he chose water specifically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was it because water is essential for life?
Right.
Or its ability to transform, from liquid to ice to vapor?
Yeah.
This choice speaks volumes about how Thales perceived the world and its underlying principles.
Okay, so if everything comes from water, where do things like rocks and fire fit in?
Sure.
How did Thales explain those?
That's where the limitations of the monist approach become apparent.
Okay.
While intriguing, reducing the universe to a single element couldn't fully account for the diversity and complexity we observe.
Right.
And that's where the pluralists entered the scene.
Okay, so the pluralists were like, one element, nah, we need more options.
Exactly.
What do they propose?
They believed in multiple elements.
Okay.
Empedocles, for example, proposed 4: earth, air, fire, and water. Sound familiar?
Wait a minute. Those are the same 4 humors from Hippocratic medicine.
You got it. The 4 elements theory wasn't just about the physical universe.
Oh, interesting.
It influenced medicine, philosophy,
Oh, right.
even art. It reflects how interconnected their worldview was.
Yeah.
They saw the human body as a microcosm of the cosmos, governed by the same fundamental elements.
That's fascinating. So the monist had their 1 element, the pluralist had their 4.
Mhm.
Who else was in this cosmic debate?
That brings us to the rebels of the group,
Okay.
the atomists.
Euthatomists.
Democritus and his teacher, Leucippus, proposed something radically different.
Yeah.
They said everything was made up of tiny, indivisible particles called atoms.
Atoms.
Yeah.
Now we're getting closer to modern science.
Right.
Did they have any way to prove this theory back then?
Not at all.
Really?
It was a purely theoretical concept based on reasoning and logic, not empirical evidence.
Wow.
Imagine trying to convince people of something you couldn't even see or measure.
So how did this atomic theory work? Were these atoms just floating around randomly?
According to Democritus, yes. He envisioned atoms moving randomly in empty space, colliding and combining to form everything we see.
Wow.
No divine intervention, no grand design.
No gods pulling the strings.
Right.
That must have been a pretty shocking idea for people at the time.
Absolutely. It challenged the very foundations of their belief system.
Yeah.
This idea that the universe was a purely material phenomenon without any divine intervention was a radical departure from traditional thinking.
So how did people react to this atomic challenge? Were they convinced?
Not everyone was on board.
Right.
This idea sparked intense debate and opposition, and that's where Plato enters the picture.
Okay.
He came along about 2 generations after Democritus
Okay.
and was deeply concerned about the implications of this purely materialist worldview.
Okay, why was Plato so worried about atoms? What was he afraid of?
Plato believed that removing the gods from the equation would undermine the very fabric of society.
Oh, wow.
Ethics, morality, the state itself.
Right.
He saw these as resting on a divinely ordered universe.
Okay.
If everything was just atoms colliding randomly,
Right.
what was the point of being good? What held society together?
Yeah.
These were serious concerns for him.
I can see how that would be unsettling for a lot of people.
Absolutely. It's no wonder that Plato, with his emphasis on order and divine purpose, felt compelled to offer an alternative.
Right. Plato's vision of a divinely ordered universe with the Demiurge shaping things according to a perfect blueprint provided a sense of comfort and stability. But it also put limits on what science could investigate, didn't it?
That's the key tension that Plato introduced.
Okay.
He opened up space for science to explore the natural world,
Yeah.
but he also made it subordinate to philosophy.
Wow.
He argued that true knowledge resided in the realm of perfect forms, accessible only through reason and contemplation.
So in a way, Plato both empowered and constrained scientific inquiry.
Yes,
He gave science a playing field, but also drew the boundaries.
that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this tension, this delicate dance between observation and reasoning, between the material and the ideal, has continued to shape the trajectory of Western science throughout history.
Okay. Let's get back to Plato's Timaeus for a moment.
Okay.
Susan Wise Bauer calls it obscure and repulsive to the modern reader. I mean, where do we even start with a text like that?
It's true that Plato's writing can be challenging. He wasn't writing for a modern audience.
Right.
His language is steeped in philosophy and metaphor, so it takes some effort to decipher.
Sounds like we need a decoder ring.
Right.
Any tips for navigating this philosophical maze?
Well, one approach is to focus on the big picture,
Oh.
the key themes and ideas,
Right.
rather than getting bogged down in the specific details.
Okay.
For example, pay attention to how Plato uses analogies and metaphors.
Right.
He often compares the universe to a living organism
Okay.
with all its parts interconnected and working together.
So look for the underlying patterns. The grand scheme of things. That makes sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Okay.
Plato's work is meant to be pondered and debated.
Right.
There's no single right way to interpret it.
So embrace the ambiguity.
Yeah.
The mystery. Embrace the challenge.
Exactly. That's the spirit of a true deep dive.
Right.
We're not just here for easy answers.
Right.
We're here to explore the complexities,
Right.
the contradictions, the enduring questions that have captivated thinkers for centuries.
Absolutely. So let's dive back into the Timaeus and see what other gems we can uncover.
Okay.
What about Plato's discussion of the senses? How did he view the role of observation in understanding the world?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's where we see both the brilliance and the limitations of Plato's approach.
Okay.
He acknowledges the importance of the senses.
Yeah.
Sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell
Right.
in gathering information about the physical world.
So he's not saying that observation is useless.
Not at all. In
Yeah.
fact,
Okay.
he provides some fascinating insights into how our senses work
Yeah.
and how they can deceive us.
Right.
But for Plato, the senses can only take us so far.
Okay.
They can tell us about the physical world,
Uh-huh.
the world of appearances, but they can't reveal the underlying reality of
Right.
the world of forms.
Okay, so it's like he's drawing a distinction between what we perceive with our senses
Right.
and what we can grasp through reason and contemplation.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of a shadow.
A shadow.
The physical world,
Okay.
the world we experience with our senses, is like a shadow cast by the real world,
Yeah.
the world of forms.
So we're like prisoners in Plato's cave, mistaking shadows for reality.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Plato's famous allegory of the cave illustrates this very point.
Okay.
We're trapped in a world of appearances,
Right.
and it takes philosophical inquiry, a kind of intellectual ascent, to break free from those chains and glimpse the true nature of reality.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
It is.
It makes you realize how much we take for granted, how easily we can be fooled by our senses.
Absolutely. And that's why,
Yeah.
for Plato,
Uh-huh.
science can never be the ultimate source of knowledge.
Okay.
It can tell us about the shadows, but it can't reveal the source of the light.
So where does that leave us? Are we doomed to wander in a world of shadows, forever grasping for a truth we can never fully grasp?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Plato believes that through philosophy, through reason and contemplation,
Right.
we could train our minds to see beyond the shadows,
Okay.
to glimpse the world of forms.
So it's not a hopeless quest.
Not at all. But it's a challenging one.
Yeah.
It requires a commitment to intellectual rigor, a willingness to question our assumptions,
Right.
and a deep desire to understand the true nature of reality.
It sounds like a journey worth taking.
Hmm.
And who knows, maybe along the way, we'll even discover that the shadows themselves hold more beauty and wonder than we ever imagined.
That's the beauty of exploration, isn't it?
Yeah.
We never know what we might find. And sometimes the most profound discoveries are the ones we make in the unexpected corners of our own minds.
Well said. And speaking of exploration,
Yeah.
we've only just scratched the surface of Plato's Timaeus.
Right?
There's so much more to unpack.
Uh-uh.
So many layers to unravel.
There is. And I think it's important to remember that
Yeah.
we're not just exploring ancient texts for historical curiosity.
Right.
These ideas, these
Totally.
debates about the nature of reality and the limits of knowledge, they're still relevant today.
Oh, absolutely.
They challenge us to think critically about our own assumptions,
Yeah.
about how we know what we know,
Right.
and about the role of science and philosophy in our modern world.
That's a great point. It's easy to dismiss these ancient thinkers as outdated or irrelevant, but their ideas continue to resonate with us, even thousands of years later.
They do.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to the power of human thought.
Yeah.
Our capacity to grapple with big questions, to search for meaning and understanding,
Right.
it transcends time and place.
Wow.
And in a way, it connects us to these early philosophers in a profound way. We're all part of this ongoing conversation, this
Yeah.
quest to understand who we are and where we fit in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, so we've talked about the Monists,
Mm-hmm.
the Pluralists,
Right.
the Atomists, and we've delved into Plato's Timaeus.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how much ground we've covered,
It is.
but there's still so much more to explore.
There is.
And
Yeah.
I think this is a good point to transition to a key aspect of Plato's philosophy that has had a lasting impact on Western thought,
Ah.
his theory of forms. It's a complex and often misunderstood concept, but it's essential for understanding his view of the universe and our place within it.
It is.
All right, let's unpack this theory of forms. What are we talking about here? What are these forms and why are they so important?
For Plato, the forms are eternal, unchanging, perfect concepts that exist outside the realm of our physical experience.
Okay.
They're the blueprints, the archetypes,
Yeah.
the ideal models of everything we see in the world.
So are you saying that there's a perfect form of a chair,
Yes.
a tree, a
Yeah.
dog, a human being?
Yes.
A perfect form of everything.
Exactly. And these forms aren't just physical.
Oh, okay.
They also encompass abstract concepts like justice, beauty, truth, and goodness.
Right.
They're the ultimate realities, the true essence of things.
Okay, so how do these forms relate to the physical world?
Oh.
What's the connection?
Plato believed that everything we see and experience in the physical world is just a pale imitation, a flawed copy of its corresponding form.
So the chair I'm sitting on right now is just an imperfect copy of the perfect form of a chair that exists somewhere out there in the realm of forms.
That's right. And the same goes for everything else. The trees we see, the animals we encounter,
Wow.
even ourselves.
Right.
We're all just imperfect reflections of our perfect forms.
That's a pretty wild concept. So what's the point of these forms? Why did Plato come up with this theory?
He believed that the forms served several important purposes.
Okay.
First, they explain why we recognize things as belonging to certain categories.
Okay.
For example,
Yeah.
why do we recognize all these different objects as chairs,
Right.
even though they have different shapes, sizes, and materials?
Yeah.
Plato would say it's because they all participate in the form of chairness.
Okay, so the forms provide a kind of blueprint or template for everything in the world.
Exactly. And second,
Okay.
the forms serve as a standard of perfection.
Oh, okay.
They represent the ideal, the most perfect version of everything.
So when we talk about justice or beauty, we're referring to these perfect forms that exist outside our experience.
That's right.
Okay. And third, Plato believed that the forms are the true objects of knowledge.
Interesting.
He argued that true knowledge is knowledge of the forms, not of the ever-changing, imperfect physical world.
So for Plato, the physical world is like a shadow play, and the forms are the real deal.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
He believed that our senses can only give us a limited and often distorted view of reality.
Okay.
To truly understand the world, we need to transcend the physical realm and access the realm of forms through reason and contemplation.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we access these forms if they exist outside our physical experience?
Plato believed that we have an innate knowledge of the forms, a kind of recollection from a previous existence.
Wow, really?
He argued that our souls, before being born into the physical world, dwelled in the realm of forms.
Interesting.
And through philosophical inquiry, through a process of dialectical reasoning.
Right. We can gradually remember and access this knowledge.
So it's like our souls have a kind of built-in GPS that can guide us back to the forms.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
But it's not an easy journey. It requires intellectual discipline, a willingness to question our assumptions, and a deep love of wisdom.
It sounds like a challenging but rewarding path.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, if Plato is right, if there really are these perfect forms underlying everything we see and experience, what does that mean for our understanding of the world and our place within it?
That's a question that has captivated philosophers for centuries.
Right.
And it's one that we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into the Timaeus and Plato's other writings.
I'm eager to continue this exploration. It's amazing how these ancient ideas can still challenge and inspire us today. But before we move on, I think it's important to acknowledge that Plato's theory of forms has been subject to intense debate and criticism throughout history.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Not everyone agrees with Plato's vision.
Right.
Some philosophers argue that the forms are unnecessary, that we can explain our knowledge and experience without appealing to these transcendent entities.
So there are alternative explanations for how we recognize things and how we acquire knowledge.
Exactly. And these alternative perspectives are just as important to consider as we try to make sense of Plato's ideas.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We're all part of this ongoing conversation, this quest to understand who we are, where we come from, and what it all means.
Beautifully said. It's a conversation that spans millennia, and we're privileged to be participants in it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Chapter 2 of the Story of Western Science, what are some key takeaways we can carry with us? What lessons can we learn from these early Greek thinkers as we continue our own explorations?
I think one of the most important lessons is the value of curiosity. Never stop asking questions, even if they seem naive or impossible to answer.
Like, why is the sky blue? Or what is time, really?
Exactly. Embrace that childlike wonder. It's the fuel that drives discovery.
Another lesson might be the importance of both observation and reasoning. We need to look closely at the world around us, but we also need to think critically about what we see.
Absolutely. Observation without interpretation is like data without analysis. We need both to make sense of the world.
And finally, I think we can learn from the courage of these early thinkers, their willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, to explore new ideas, even if they were controversial or unpopular.
That's so crucial. Progress requires us to step outside our comfort zones, to embrace uncertainty, and to be open to new possibilities.
It's like that quote from Albert Einstein. The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing.
I love that. It perfectly captures the spirit of scientific inquiry. Never stop questioning, never stop exploring, and never lose that sense of awe and wonder.
Well said. So to our listeners, if you're enjoying these deep dives into the history of science, be sure to check out our discussion of Chapter 3, where we'll explore how these ideas continue to evolve and shape the course of Western thought. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more fascinating explorations. We've got a lot more to uncover together. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.